The agency, I think most people honestly don't really probably give a shit about the Epstein files. They're more concerned now about this release from Tulsi Gabbard and the talk about, manipulating intelligence, for the 2016 election,
right,
and Russian collusion and all of that. That speaks more to the agency than the Epstein files does, just from a, whose responsibility is whose, right? The Epstein thing is a DOJ, FBI issue. I think if they're concerned about it, it's because of how it erodes trust in organizations, institutions, right? And that's happened a lot. So, there's a lot of good people. I know, again, every time I talk about the agency, people are like, fuck you, you're such a shill. But there's a lot of good people doing very difficult work for the agency.
I believe
right?
that. I believe that.
And so, I think if anything, they take it personally when people think, fuck the CIA, you gotta burn it down and start over again. Like they said with the FBI as well.
I've talked about that many times. Like, you don't know what the fuck is going on in the world. The world is filled with chaos. Like, you need people that are paying attention to that shit, and they should be on your side.
Yeah.
They should be on the side of the American people, paying attention to threats. If you think that not paying attention at all is going to do you any good when there's all these countries out there that are fucking plotting constantly, you're crazy.
Yeah. No.
You're living in a utopia. You're living in a fake world. The real world is filled with madness. And you got to have people paying attention to it.
Yeah. But I think that, to answer that question, I think they're more focused on or interested in or, looking at this issue of, and it's surfaced again right at the same time as the Epstein files, right? Now, it's like sucking all the oxygen out of the room for the past couple of days. Tulsi Gabbard comes out and says, I'm releasing these documents. She releases these documents.
What do you think about all that? Like, so this is the accusation. They're throwing around the word treason.
Yeah.
They're saying that Obama knew that Russia did not meddle in the election, did not have any impact in the election, but yet promoted this idea. And then there's been some incredible clips of all these different news reporters, CNN and MSNBC, just saying over and over and over again, clear evidence of Russian collusion. And
yeah. And you got Hillary Clinton saying, is an air of illegitimacy around Trump's, victory, from 2016 because of this. I mean, she was very clear about it. And as were many others.
The noose is tightening on Trump.
Yeah.
It's all going to come out. He's an agent of Russia.
Yeah. Adam Schiff coming out on camera numerous times saying, I can't tell you what I've seen, but I've seen things. There's a lot more than circumstantial evidence about this collusion. So, but again, it's much more it's always the same thing. It's much more complex than what folks tend to hear just in like a 2.5 or 3 minute news segment, right? So the Democrats want you to think there's nothing to see here in these documents. How could you possibly spend time doing this? You're just trying to distract from the Epstein files. And the Republicans are saying Obama committed treason, right? The reality is, as it oftentimes is somewhere in that middle, right? There's a lot of conflating of issues here. So nobody is questioning, not Republicans or Democrats, nobody's questioning that the Russians meddled in the election, just like they did in the previous one, just like they did in this last one. They've been meddling since World War II, right? Since the end of World War II. They've always had an interest in influencing U.S. politics.
Now, when you say meddle, do you mean like social media bots? Do you mean like influencing politicians? Like, what do you mean by meddle?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the early days, what were they doing? In the early days, they would pay off trade union representatives, right, to push a certain line, to push for a softer tone, much like the Chinese do now, push for a softer tone against the Soviet Union, right, or during World War II to push for isolationism, keep the U.S. out of the war, right, before the Nazis turned on the Soviet Union and then they tended to need us. Or they would pay journalists to write articles pushing a particular point of view. And so there were those things. Now, social media meddling is a lot easier, right? It's a lot cheaper.
For sure they do that.
Yeah, for sure they do that.
And for sure they did that in 2016.
Yeah, absolutely, and nobody's questioning that, right? What's happening is that once again, there's a bit of a messaging problem from the Trump administration. The Trump administration, at the end of the day, is saying what was bullshit was this Russia collusion angle, right? Was the idea that, this is complicated to explain, and I'm not doing a very good job of it, but they're saying yes, there was meddling, but you pushed a story, meaning Brennan and Comey and all the others that were involved in this, and then going up to the top with Obama, saying you took what was a Intel Community Assessment, an ICA is because everything has an acronym, that said there was no indication of Russian efforts to push or influence in a particular direction the election, right? And most of that initial reporting was on election infrastructure. So there was a fairly significant bit there that said the Russians weren't able to hack into election machines and actually alter vote counts, right? So they said we have seen no evidence of that, right? And so you could argue that in part the Trump administration is having a hard time explaining, much like I am, that the problem here wasn't that there was anybody saying there's no meddling. There's meddling. They just saying that you, at a certain point, around about December 9th, I think it was, you had a meeting where Obama was sitting in there with Comey and Andrew McCabe and a variety of others, and the president himself requested a different intelligence community assessment, which is a little unusual for a president to say, I'd like you to do an ICA on a particular thing, which is what he did.
Can you elaborate on that? Like, so they were telling him what?
Well, they were telling him we don't see that Russian meddling impacted the election, basically. The Dems are saying, well, that's just about the electronic infrastructure, about the voting machines, right? In reality, the ICA was also that instruction, the PDB, the President's Daily Brief, and the writing that had been done, the analysis that had been done up to that point was saying we haven't seen anything that the Russian meddling influenced the outcome of the election. Well, then shortly, and then they squashed that particular piece, right? They said let's shelve that, and that's what a lot of the emails that Tulsi Gabbard released show, right? It's like all this agonizing. It's amazing any shit gets done in the government when you read these emails going back and forth between James Clapper at the DNI and other places.
Yeah, you sent me some of that stuff to
exactly.
go through.
Yeah, the analysts and others. And they're all saying, okay, well, what kind of tone do we give it? What do we say about this? And you can also see in there that they're saying, we don't think the Steele dossier is credible. The two senior Russian analysts, right, at the agency were telling John Brennan at the time, if you put the dossier in there as a piece of information into this assessment, you're compromising the credibility of the whole thing because we don't believe it, right? And this is December, right? And Brennan instructed, and it's in writing, instructed them to go ahead and do it, right? Because it basically, he liked the narrative, right, of the Steele dossier.
Right.
And so he chose that over the analytical process, right, over the discipline that you need to corroborate information that's going to go to a high-level intel assessment. So, if anybody's in the crosshairs right now, it's probably John Brennan, right, in terms of, because he went up on Capitol Hill at some point and said that, the Steele dossier didn't form an important point of, wasn't in the document, wasn't in the ICA. The ICA is now out there, and sure enough, it was not only in the annex, it was in the body of the report, which gives it much more credibility. So, yeah, so he, I'm not a lawyer, but, I think he should be concerned a little bit about where that might go. But Obama reportedly, and it's in email traffic, requested, right, a different ICA. And so shortly thereafter, they produced a report.
How does he say it?
I forget what the exact wording. I'm not going to get it.
Because that's a crazy thing. If you have a bunch of experts
Yeah.
that give you an assessment, these are the facts. This is how it went down. You're like, I don't like those facts.
Well, I don't think he said I don't like the
it.
facts, and that's where this is going to be a problem. Anybody who thinks Obama's going to go to prison for treasonous conspiracy, I think, again, much like Pam Bondi, with her treating of the Epstein files, which was ridiculous, Tulsi Gabbard's gotten out over her skis. Treasonous conspiracy.
Is that what she said?
That's what she said. It's not going to happen. Anybody who thinks that Obama's going to, forget about it. You'll be lucky if you get any consequences of anything out of this. Again, I'm very cynical about where investigations go.
Well, isn't this also based on the Supreme Court's justification of everything that Trump did while he was in office?
Right.
So you can't try them for things
Immunity.
they do when they're off. Yeah,
immunity for acting under the authority as a president. But so, and it's also very nuanced, right? He can sit in there. He's perfectly got the right to sit in a meeting and say, okay, well, I tell you what, let's sit on this, right? And James Clapper and the others agreed, yeah, we're gonna take this document and we're gonna set it aside that we all worked on. Now we want to restructure it, focused on, you know, the outcome of the election and the Russian meddling and where this went and how they. So it was, he can do that, right? And it's nuanced, and he can and never get in trouble because